The flashing red and blue lights of two patrol cars washed over the perfectly manicured lawns of Maplewood Hills, turning a quiet Tuesday morning into a stage for a tense, silent drama. They reflected off the glossy yellow paint of a massive excavator, its bucket hovering in the air like some prehistoric beast ready to devour its prey. That prey was the small, charming guest house nestled at the back of my yard, a structure of love and sweat, now condemned to death by a piece of paper. And the person holding that paper, the one playing the role of executioner, was Alicia Thomas. She stood there, on my lawn, a paragon of suburban power chic. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a perfect bun, not a single strand out of place. The cream-colored blazer she wore cost more than some of my neighbors' monthly mortgage payments. But it was her smile that was the real weapon. It didn't reach her cold, ice-blue eyes. It was a mere curl of the lips, a display of smugness and absolute authority. She held up the paper, an emergency demolition order, as if it were a royal decree. "Austin," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet, but sharp as broken glass. "I tried to be reasonable. The board gave you multiple opportunities to comply. You brought this on yourself." The demolition crew foreman, a large man with a florid face and a beer gut straining the fabric of his orange safety shirt, gave me an almost apologetic look before shifting his gaze to Alicia for his orders. The two police officers stood by their cars, visibly uncomfortable. They were here to keep the peace on an HOA civil dispute, and they hated it. You could see it in the way they deliberately avoided my eyes, focusing instead on a perfectly pruned rosebush in the yard across the street. I stood on my back porch steps, my hands loose at my sides, forcing my breathing to remain steady. I'd been in far more stressful situations. I'd felt the grit of Afghan sand in my boots and heard the whine of bullets past my ear. But this was a different kind of war. This was home front. This battle wasn't for country or freedom, but for a friend's sanctuary, for a principle. I looked past Alicia at the guest house. I could see every nail I'd hammered, every board I'd sawed. I had built it with my own two hands, dedicating every weekend for 6 months to turn a forgotten corner of my yard into a place of refuge. "Alicia, you know as well as I do that this order is illegal," I said, my voice low and even. I'd learned to control my tone to mask the chaos inside. "You don't have the authority to do this." She laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Oh, but I do, Austin. I am the president of this Homeowners Association. And your illegal accessory dwelling is a flagrant violation of the covenants you agreed to when you bought your home here. It's coming down." She motioned to the excavator operator. The diesel engine roared to life, the loud chugging sound shattering the tense silence. That's when I felt a hot surge of pure rage rising from my chest, but I tamped it down. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Logic and calm were my only allies. "Officer," I called out, my voice carrying clearly over the engine's rumble. "I want it on the record that I, Austin Bailey, the legal owner of this property, do not consent to this demolition. Any damage incurred will be considered willful destruction of private property." The older of the two cops sighed, finally looking me in the eye. "Sir, this is a civil matter. We're just here to make sure nobody gets hurt." A textbook answer. Useless. Alicia's smile widened. "You hear that, Austin? They can't help you. Now, if you'll please step aside." She waved a dismissive hand in my direction, as if shooing away an annoying fly. But I didn't move. Instead, I locked my eyes on hers, letting her see the cold resolve there. "You are making a very, very big mistake, Alicia. It hadn't always been like this. Just 6 months ago, Maplewood Hills had been, what its name suggested, a peaceful suburban enclave. Craftsman-style homes sat on generous lots, white picket fences enclosing gardens of roses and hydrangeas. Kids played street hockey in the evenings, and neighbors actually talked to each other over those fences. The HOA had been a sleepy board of volunteers, more concerned with organizing the annual 4th of July barbecue than with measuring the height of someone's grass. My life, too, had been peaceful. After 10 years in the Marine Corps, with 2 deployments to places I'd rather not remember, the quiet boredom of suburbia felt like a gift. I'd bought my house with a VA loan and made it my fortress. By day, I was a lawyer, but not for some glossy downtown firm. I ran a small, one-man office, dedicating my time to pro bono work for veterans struggling with VA paperwork, custody battles, or just trying to navigate a world that seemed to have forgotten them. It was my work, my mission. And then Marcus called. Marcus had been in my recon unit. We had been through hell and back together. He was the one who pulled me to cover when my leg got peppered with shrapnel in Fallujah. Now, he was the one who needed help. A horrific car accident had stolen the use of his legs, and with it, his job, his wife, and his self-respect. He was living in a third-floor walk-up apartment in a bad part of town and was on a downward spiral. "Hey man," I'd said over the phone, trying to keep my voice light. "Why don't you come stay with me for a while? I've got plenty of room." There was a long silence. "I can't, Austin," he finally said, his voice cracking. "I'm not a charity case." My heart clenched. A charity case. A Marine. A hero. Feeling like a burden. I wasn't going to let that happen. That night, the idea for the guest house was born. It would be his own space, fully wheelchair accessible, with a private entrance and a zero-threshold shower. It would be a place for him to heal, to regain his independence. I checked the city codes, filed for the permits, and got the approvals without a single issue. The old HOA board, at the time, had simply nodded and wished me luck. I did most of the work myself. I learned how to pour concrete from YouTube videos. I framed the walls with the help of a few other vet buddies. Every shingle, every brick, was placed with a purpose. It was as much my therapy as it was for him. When it was done, it was perfect. A handsome little cottage, painted a soothing slate gray, with a cedar ramp leading up to the front porch. It stood as a symbol of friendship and redemption. Marcus had cried when he first saw it. It was the first time I'd ever seen him cry. He was scheduled to move in at the end of the month, but we hadn't counted on Alicia Thomas. She had moved into the neighborhood about a year prior, and like an invasive vine, she quickly insinuated herself into every aspect of community life. She ran for HOA president on a platform of restoring prestige and protecting property values. The neighbors, weary of the previous lax leadership, were captivated by her energy and her promises of perfection. They voted her in by a landslide, and that's when the election took place in the community clubhouse, a bland room that smelled of stale coffee and civic indifference. Most previous HOA meetings had been sparsely attended. It was mainly bored retirees and one or two people with a specific grievance about a neighbor's fence. But that night was different. The room was packed. Alicia had gone door to door, armed with a brilliant smile and glossy pamphlets. She had spoken about unlocking the potential of Maplewood Hills. She had used words like exclusivity, prestige, and secure investment. She had tapped into a simmering fear many people didn't even know they had, the fear that their little slice of paradise was slowly becoming average. She stood at the front of the room, not behind the podium but pacing before us, creating a false sense of intimacy. She didn't look like a politician. She looked like a lifestyle guru about to reveal the secrets to a perfect life. "Look around us," she began, her voice resonating with carefully polished sincerity. "We live in one of the most desirable neighborhoods. But desirable doesn't mean perfect. I see shutters that need a fresh coat of paint. I see RVs parked in driveways over the weekend, cheapening our aesthetic. I see wasted potential." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm not proposing radical changes. I am proposing care, a shared commitment to excellence. Let's make Maplewood Hills not just a place to live, but a statement." People nodded. Her words were seductive. They soothed their insecurities. They had worked hard for these homes, and the idea of protecting their investment sounded sensible. Dave, the outgoing HOA president, a retired chemistry teacher who just wanted to spend more time with his stamps, tried to offer a weak counterpoint. "Well, we've always been a pretty relaxed community, Alicia." She turned to him, her smile never faltering. "Dave, relaxed is the first step towards sloppy, and sloppy sends our property values into a nosedive." The room was silent. She had struck the nerve. The vote was a formality. Alicia Thomas won in a landslide. For the first month, things seemed great. Alicia was a dynamo. She negotiated a new contract with the waste management company that saved everyone $5 a month. She organized a volunteer team to repaint the playground equipment in the community park. She even had dog waste bag dispensers installed along the walking paths. "See," people said, "this is what we needed. Someone who actually cares." I was briefly fooled myself. I was busy with Marcus's guest house and my practice, so I was happy to see someone taking initiative, But then, the cracks began to show. It started with an email. Subject: Trash Receptacle Regulation Update. The email explained that all trash and recycling bins must now be moved inside a garage or behind a fence out of public view within 60 minutes of pickup. Violations would result in a $25 fine. A little strict, I thought, but perhaps not unreasonable. A week later, another email. Subject: Landscape Ornamentation Guidelines. This one was long, but garden gnomes, plastic flamingos, and colorful pinwheels were strictly prohibited. They were deemed aesthetically displeasing and detracted from the visual harmony of the community. That's when I started to feel uneasy. This wasn't about property values anymore. This was about control. Soon, the rules became a flood. A 10-page memorandum was mailed to every home, titled The New and Improved Maplewood Hills Community Standards. It read like the manifesto of a miniature dictatorship. All mailboxes had to be replaced with a single, expensive model, available only from an HOA-approved vendor. The price? $400, not including installation. Grass had to be maintained between the precise heights of 2 and 3.5 inches. Only certain flowers from an approved list were permitted. No native plants, no vegetable gardens in the front yard. Basketball hoops had to be disassembled after every use. Children's playsets could not be made of brightly colored plastic. Every rule came with an escalating fine structure. $25 for the first offense, $100 for the second, and so on. Alicia had formed a new architectural committee, consisting of herself and 2 of her most sycophantic neighbors, to enforce these rules. They would stroll through the neighborhood every evening with clipboards and tape measures, looking like a patrol from the fashion police. And then the real cruelty began to show. Alicia's targets were not random. She went after the people least likely to fight back. The first victim was Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old widow who lived down the street from me. Her husband, a passionate gardener, had passed away 2 years prior. His legacy was an award-winning rose garden he had tended for 40 years. Alicia fined her $150 because the rose varieties were. Sentiment doesn't increase property values, Mrs. Gable. Either remove them or keep paying the fines. The neighborhood was shocked, but no one said a word. Fear was already taking root. Next were the Millers, a young military family. The husband, an Army captain, was on his 3rd deployment overseas. His wife was home alone with 2 small children. They received a $50 fine because their 5-year-old son had left his red tricycle on the driveway one afternoon. The violation notice brazenly noted, improperly stored recreational equipment. When Mrs. Miller called to protest, Alicia told her that if her husband could follow rules in the military, she could certainly follow the rules of the community. The cruelty of that remark was breathtaking. The friendly atmosphere of Maplewood Hills had rapidly evaporated. In its place was suspicion. Alicia had instituted an anonymous tip hotline where residents could report their neighbors' violations. Suddenly, people who once shared cups of sugar were now peering at each other through their curtains, looking for a blade of grass that was too tall or a forgotten toy. The conversations over the fences stopped. The neighborhood block parties became a distant memory. Alicia hadn't just changed the rules, she had changed the soul of the place. She had turned neighbors into informants and strangers. And I, busy building a sanctuary for Marcus, didn't realize just how far the cancer had spread until it arrived on my own doorstep. The guest house was finished. The last rays of a warm September afternoon glinted off the new slate gray paint, and the cedar ramp gave off a rich, welcoming scent. Everything was ready for Marcus. He was scheduled to move in at the end of the week. I was standing in the backyard, admiring my handiwork, feeling a simple, quiet pride when I saw her. Alicia Thomas, standing on the sidewalk in front of my house. She wasn't walking. She was stationary, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on my little structure. The look on her face wasn't one of curiosity or admiration. It was the look an art collector gives upon discovering a forgery in their gallery, a mixture of disgust and personal offense. The guest house, with its humanitarian purpose and its humble existence, was clear. It was a dissonant note in the symphony of compliance she was trying to compose. I knew, in that moment, she was coming for me. I just didn't expect it to be so fast. 2 days later, it arrived. Not a friendly email or a phone call. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, left in my mailbox by one of her board cronies. My name was printed on it in a severe, stately font. It felt heavy in my hand, as if it were made of lead instead of paper. Inside was a 3-page letter, printed on official Maplewood Hills Homeowners Association letterhead. Its language was a tangled mess of pseudo-legal jargon designed to intimidate and overwhelm. It cited articles and bylaws I had never seen before, talking about things like architectural harmony and maintaining the aesthetic integrity of the community. The letter declared my guest house to be in a state of multiple, egregious violations. First, unauthorized major structural addition. The letter acknowledged my city permits, but argued brazenly that I had failed to receive prior written approval from the current Architectural Review Committee, a committee Alicia had created just a few weeks prior. Second, non-conforming design. The wheelchair ramp was singled out specifically, described as a utilitarian addition inconsistent with the mock historic character of our neighborhood. Third, and this was what made my blood boil, the letter accused me of intending to use the structure as a rental property, which would bring undesirable elements into our community. Finally came the conclusion. I was being fined an initial sum of $1,000. But that wasn't all. I was given an ultimatum. I had 30 days to do one of two things: either completely dismantle the structure and restore the yard to its original condition, or submit a full new set of architectural drawings to Alicia's committee for review. This submission had to be accompanied by a non-refundable review fee of $5,000, and the letter made it clear that any plan must include the removal of the offending ramp and its replacement with a more aesthetically appropriate entrance. It was a perfect trap. They had turned a disabled veteran's accessibility into an aesthetic issue. They had put a punishing price tag on an approval they never intended to grant. I reread the letter twice, my initial disbelief hardening into a cold, sharp anger. This wasn't about rules. This was a targeted hit. I decided to confront her directly. Going to the meetings and arguing would be pointless. She controlled them. Sending a legal letter would only delay the inevitable. I needed to look her in the eye and see what I was really dealing with. That evening, I walked to her house. Alicia's home was at the end of a cul-de-sac, the largest in the neighborhood. It was eerily perfect. The lawn looked like a green velvet carpet, not a single blade daring to grow taller than its brethren. Every shrub was trimmed into a perfect sphere or square. Even the pebbles in the walkway seemed to be arranged in order. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a sterile architectural model. I rang the bell, and after a moment, she opened the door. She was wearing a silk robe, and she looked annoyed at the interruption. But when she saw it was me, a thin smile touched her lips. She had been expecting this. "Austin, what a surprise," she said, her tone completely devoid of it. "Can I help you?" I held up the envelope. "I think you know what I'm here about. We need to talk about this." She glanced at the envelope, and then back at me, her expression one of amusement. "Oh, that. I thought it was rather self-explanatory. Do come in, but only for a moment." She led me into a living room that looked like a page from an interior design magazine. Everything was white, cream, or dove gray. It was beautiful, but cold and lifeless, much like its owner. I remained standing. "There's nothing self-explanatory about it, Alicia. This is a gross abuse of power. You're making up rules as you go along." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm not making anything up. I'm enforcing the standards we all agreed to. The negligence of the previous board is not an excuse for your non-compliance. There's a new order in Maplewood Hills. I have city permits. The prior board knew my plans. This structure was built to help a disabled veteran, a friend of mine who served this country," I said, trying to keep the fury out of my voice. "And you think that gives you a free pass?" she scoffed. "Your patriotism doesn't entitle you to violate community covenants. In fact, that you would try to use your friend's condition to evoke sympathy is rather pathetic. It smacks of desperation. The blow was low and cruel, calculated to make me lose my temper." I took a deep breath. "This has nothing to do with patriotism. It's about basic decency, something you seem to be lacking." Her smile vanished, replaced by a hard, cold look. "Decency doesn't pay the bills, Austin. Compliance does. And you, having an unapproved tenant who clearly cannot care for himself, will lower the value of every home on this street. It would be a shame," she added, her voice dropping meaningfully, "if your friend went to all this trouble only to end up with nowhere to go." There it was, the unveiled threat. She wasn't just targeting the house, she was targeting Marcus, using him as a pawn in her power game. Everything became crystal clear in that moment. There was no room for compromise. There was no reasoning with her. This person didn't operate on logic or fairness, but on domination. I looked around her perfect, cold room, then directly into her soulless eyes. My anger had subsided, replaced by something much colder, much harder. A resolve. "You've made your position clear, Alicia," I said softly. "And now I'll make mine. I'm not tearing down that house. I'm not paying you a single dime. And my friend is moving in at the end of the week. If you try to stop that from happening, you're going to find out that I am not an elderly widow or a lonely military wife. You've picked the wrong fight." I turned and walked out, not waiting for a response. As I walked down her perfectly arranged pathway, under the cold light of her porch lamp, I felt a shift inside me. The war had come to me. Now, I was going to take the war to her. The sleeping giant was awake. I didn't sleep that night. But it wasn't a sleeplessness born of anxiety or fear. It was the sleeplessness of a soldier before a battle, an energized stillness where the mind sharpens and the senses heighten. The hot anger I'd felt at Alicia's house had cooled, hardening into a purpose as cold and sharp as steel. She had made a critical tactical error. She had made it personal, and she had shown me my true enemy. She wasn't an overzealous HOA president. She was a bully who used rules as a weapon, and I knew exactly how to disarm bullies. The next morning, instead of heading to my law office, I turned my home study into a command center. This room was my sanctuary, the walls adorned with my Marine Corps commendations, a framed map of the Helmand province, and my law degree. It was a fusion of the two men I was, the soldier and the lawyer. Normally, it was a place of order. Today, it was a war room. And the centerpiece of that war room was Alicia's violation letter. I spread it out on my desk under the glare of a single lamp and began to dissect it, not as an angry homeowner, but as an attorney preparing for a cross-examination. Every sentence, every word, every comma was put under scrutiny. I pushed my emotions aside. Emotion was a cloud. I needed clarity. The first step was reconnaissance. I pulled out the binder I'd received when I bought my house, the thick one containing the original covenants, conditions, and restrictions for the Maplewood Hills HOA. I read them, cover to cover, highlighting every clause that pertained to new construction, accessory dwellings, and the approval process. As I'd remembered, the original rules were vague, requiring only that structures be in harmony with the neighborhood and adhere to city codes. There was no mention of architectural review committees or exorbitant review fees. Next, I drafted a formal, polite email to the HOA board. As a member of the association, I was requesting access to certain public records, as was my right under state law. I asked for a copy of all bylaws amended and adopted within the last 12 months. I asked for the official minutes of all board meetings from that same period, especially the meeting where the new rules on architectural harmony and the fine structure were voted into effect. I knew she'd try to stonewall me, but making the official request in writing was a crucial legal step. It started a clock. They had a certain amount of time to comply. Failure to do so would be a violation in itself. Predictably, the response I received from one of Alicia's board cronies was a thinly veiled delay tactic. "Dear Mr. Bailey, thank you for your request. The board is currently in the process of compiling and approving the minutes from recent meetings. We will make the documents available to you as soon as they are finalized." It was a bald-faced lie. As soon as they are finalized could mean never. She was stalling, hoping I'd get frustrated or that my 30-day deadline would expire first. Blocked in that direction, I turned my attention back to the one weapon I did have, the violation letter itself. If Alicia wouldn't show me the rules, I would verify the legality of the ones she was citing against me. The letter was deliberately written to look intimidating, filled with citations. It read, "Such a structural addition is in direct violation of Maplewood County Code 113B, pertaining to aesthetic nuisances." It was a clever move on her part. By invoking the county government, she was attempting to elevate her threat from a civil dispute to a violation of law. It was designed to make the average person panic and comply immediately. But I wasn't the average person. I was a lawyer. I opened my web browser and navigated to the Maplewood County Online Ordinance Repository, a public database I'd used dozens of times for my work. I typed code 113B into the search bar. I hit enter. The screen flickered, and then the result. "No results found for your query. Strange. Maybe a typo on my part." I tried again, double-checking every letter and number. Code 113B. The same result. No results found. Now, a cold feeling started to creep up my spine. I broadened my search. I searched for aesthetic nuisance. A hit. There was a county ordinance related to nuisances, but it was under Section 245.7, and its language was vastly different, pertaining mostly to derelict or unsafe structures, not the aesthetics of a newly built ramp. I sat there, staring at the screen. I searched every possible variation. Code 11, Section 3B. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And then the truth hit me. Maplewood County Code 113B didn't exist. It had never existed. She made it up. She had invented a law and put it in an official legal notice to threaten me. This was no longer an HOA power trip. This was fraud. My pulse quickened. With this new discovery, I looked at the letter with fresh eyes. Everything was now suspect. My gaze fell to the bottom right corner of the last page, where a formal-looking notary seal was embossed, supposedly certifying the authenticity of Alicia's signature. It looked fine from a distance, but now, I trusted nothing. I took the letter to my scanner and made a high-resolution scan, then zoomed in on the image of the seal on my computer monitor. And there it was, the second crack in her armor. A real notary seal, when impressed with ink, has tiny imperfections. The ink bleeds into the paper fibers ever so slightly. The edges are minutely irregular. But this seal was perfect. Too perfect. As the edges of the circle were jagged, a clear sign of a low-resolution digital image. The font of the notary's name was slightly different from the font of the date. It wasn't a real seal. It was a JPEG image, copied and pasted from the internet, placed on the document to look legitimate. I leaned back in my chair, a feeling of near elation washing over me. I had her, not on an argument about HOA rules, but on document fraud and forgery. She had been too arrogant. She assumed no one, especially some stubborn Marine, would have the knowledge or the tenacity to check her work. She assumed intimidation would be enough, but she had underestimated her opponent. She had handed me a rope, and I was going to use it to hang her. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The game had changed completely. Alicia Thomas wasn't just an HOA tyrant, she was a criminal, and I had the proof. Evidence. I had evidence. The two words repeated in my head like a drumbeat. The discovery of the fraud changed everything. My mission was no longer defensive, it was now an offensive. The goal wasn't just to save Marcus's guest house, but to dismantle Alicia Thomas and the corrupt empire she was building. But a single piece of evidence, however damning, could be dismissed as a clerical error or a misunderstanding. I knew from my legal practice that the real power was in the pattern. One incident is an anomaly, two is a coincidence, three or more, and it's a deliberate campaign. I needed to find the other victims. I knew they were out there, suffering in silence behind their HOA-approved front doors. I needed to turn their individual fear into a collective force. I started with the known targets, Mrs. Gable with her roses, and the Miller family with the tricycle. I had to be careful. Alicia had sown such deep mistrust that a random knock on the door could be seen as an act of aggression. I decided to start with Mrs. Gable. I went over one afternoon, carrying a small basket of tomatoes from my backyard garden, a garden I was sure violated several of Alicia's rules. I found her in the front yard, sadly looking at the empty patch of earth where her husband's prize-winning roses used to be. She had dug them up. My heart sank at the sight. She had folded to Alicia's bullying. "Afternoon, Mrs. Gable," I said gently, "brought you some tomatoes." She started, then gave me a weak smile. "Oh, Austin, how kind of you. Thank you. They look wonderful." She looked back at the empty plot, and her smile faded. "I had to do it, you know. I couldn't afford the fines." "I know, and it's wrong," I said. "Would you mind if I saw the violation letter they sent you? I'm having some trouble with them myself, and I'm trying to understand how they operate." She looked hesitant, fear plain in her eyes. "Oh, I don't want any more trouble, dear. There won't be any trouble, ma'am." "Marine's promise," I said, trying a reassuring smile. "Just between you and me." She paused for a moment, then nodded, inviting me inside. Her house smelled of old books and lavender, the scent of a kinder era. She retrieved a cream-colored envelope from a drawer, and I felt a chilling sense of familiarity. It was identical to mine. As she handed it to me, I quickly scanned past the boilerplate nonsense until I found what I was looking for. And there it was. Violation of Maplewood County Code 113B. And below it, on the final page, the exact same forged notary seal. I pointed to the line. "Mrs. Gable, this rule doesn't exist." I checked. There is no such code in Maplewood County. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. What are you saying? It's a lie, I said, my voice firm. She made it up to scare you. And this seal, I pointed to the blurry JPEG image, is a forgery. This isn't a legal document, it's fraud. I could see a cascade of emotions cross her face. Disbelief, confusion, and then a spark of righteous anger. The fear in her eyes was replaced with a cold resolve. That wicked woman, she whispered. She made me dig up George's roses. I put a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this, Mrs. Gable. She's doing the same thing to me. I gained my first ally that day. Mrs. Gable, with her quiet fury and her network of longtime friends in the neighborhood, became an invaluable source of information. She pointed me toward the Millers. The story repeated with Mrs. Miller. I approached her, introducing myself as a veterans advocate and a neighbor. When I showed her the same fraudulent entries on her own violation notice for her son's tricycle, her exhaustion and stress transformed into a focused rage. How dare she said, her voice trembling. My husband is halfway around the world, defending this country, and she's here, making up laws to terrorize his family over a child's toy. She willingly gave me a copy of her letter and promised to keep quiet. Through Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Miller, the network began to form. I got 2 more names. A single mother being fined for a small oil stain on her driveway, and a newly retired couple being fined $500 for painting their front door an unapproved shade of blue. I visited each one, always discreetly, always leading with empathy before presenting the evidence. The reaction was always the same. Initial shock, followed by anger. Within a week, I had a file an inch thick with copies of fraudulent documents. And as I laid them out on my desk, a clear, alarming pattern emerged. The victimology. Everyone targeted was someone Alicia perceived as weak. The elderly, single-income households, families with a deployed spouse. People who were less likely to have the resources, time, or legal know-how to fight back. The methodology. Every notice followed the same script. A petty violation, a newly invented rule, a fake legal citation, and a forged notary seal. It was a system designed to shock and awe people into compliance. The goal. The fines were always structured to escalate rapidly. It would start with $50 or $100, but subsequent notices would double the amount, adding late fees and interest. It was clear this wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about generating revenue. But for what? I didn't yet know. Alicia, of course, was no fool. She must have heard the whispers. She likely saw me visiting Mrs. Gable's home. Sensing resistance, she decided to ramp up the pressure on me. Another cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. Second and final notice of violation. My fine had been increased to $2,000. My deadline had been shortened to 14 days. The letter was filled with more threatening language, talking about liens and civil suits. A few days later, 2 of her architectural committee cronies appeared at the edge of my property. They said nothing, just stood there, openly taking pictures of my guest house with their cell phones, clipboards in hand. It was a clear act of psychological intimidation, designed to make me feel watched and isolated. But they were too late. I wasn't isolated anymore. I watched them from my study window, my gaze flicking from them to the growing file on my desk. Every picture they took only strengthened my resolve. That evening, I sat there, surrounded by the stories of my neighbors' injustices. I had the evidence, I had the witnesses, and I had a pattern of criminal behavior. I had gone as far as I could as a private citizen and a lawyer. It was time to bring my weapons to someone who could use them to truly begin the fight. It was time to talk to the district attorney. The next morning, I put on my best suit. It was the one I reserved for major court appearances: charcoal, gray wool, perfectly tailored, a silk navy tie, and a neat half Windsor. This wasn't an act of vanity. It was armor. I knew I was about to walk into a world where appearances and initial credibility were everything. I couldn't walk into the district attorney's office looking like an aggrieved homeowner. I had to look like a serious attorney, an officer of the court. My file was meticulously organized. Each victim's case had its own tab, clearly labeled Gable, M, Miller, S, and so on. At the front, I had written a 1-page executive summary, laying out the key points: systematic fraud, forgery, and the targeting of protected classes. I had highlighted the fraudulent citations and attached annotated printouts from the county ordinance website showing they didn't exist. I had included magnified scans of the fake notary seal. I was ready. The county administration building was a brutalist concrete structure that had a way of making you feel small and insignificant, which was likely the point. The air inside smelled of old paper and stressed-out urgency. I knew getting a meeting with the DA herself was a long shot. Instead, I'd secured an appointment with one of her assistants, a woman named Patricia Williams. I knew nothing about her, which made me nervous. Would she be a young, ambitious prosecutor looking for a big case, or a jaded, nearing retirement type who would just want to brush me off? After navigating a metal detector and a maze of beige hallways, I was shown into a small, cluttered office. Patricia Williams was neither extreme. She was in her late 30s, dressed in a practical suit, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her eyes were intelligent and sharp, but there was a weariness. Can you be more specific? I took a breath. This was it. Good morning, Miss Williams. Thank you for your time. I know you're busy, so I'll get right to it. I'm here to report an organized scheme of fraud, forgery, and extortion taking place in the Maplewood Hills subdivision. She blinked, unfazed. Those are very serious allegations, sir. And that subdivision, it has a homeowners association, correct? Yes, it does, I said. A slight, almost imperceptible nod from her. I'd seen it before. It was the nod that said, "Ah, here we go. An HOA fight. Mr. Bailey," she said, tapping a pen on her legal pad. "I'm sure you know, as an attorney yourself, that our office does not get involved in civil HOA disputes. If you have an issue with their fees or regulations, you'll have to take it through the civil courts." "I understand that completely, ma'am," I replied, keeping my tone even and respectful. "And if this were about the color of my mailbox, I wouldn't be wasting your time." "This is not a civil dispute. It is a criminal matter. Felonies are being committed, using the HOA as a cover." The confidence in my voice seemed to catch her attention. She leaned forward slightly. "All right, Mr. Bailey, you have 10 minutes. Impress me." I pushed the file across the desk. "It's all in there, but I'll give you the summary. It started with me. I received this violation notice." I pulled out my copy and pointed. "For building a guest house for a disabled veteran friend. Note the citation to Maplewood County Code 113B. I slid a printout from the county website across the desk. This is the search result for that code on the county's own legal portal. As you can see, it doesn't exist. Patricia picked up the paper. For the first time, her professional weariness seemed to recede, replaced by a sharp curiosity. She looked from the printout back to the letter, then at me. "It was invented," I stated flatly. "Next, please see the notary seal on the final page." "This is a magnified scan." I handed her the next piece of evidence. She narrowed her eyes at the image. As a lawyer, she recognized the signs instantly. "Pixelation," she murmured. "This is a digital image." "Exactly. A copy-paste job. A forgery," I confirmed. Now, if this were just my case, it might be written off as a bizarre mistake. But it's not. I opened the larger file. This is the violation notice sent to an 80-year-old widow, Mrs. Gable, for having the wrong kind of roses. Same county code 113B, same fake seal. This one belongs to the Miller family. Her husband is in Afghanistan. They were fined for their 5-year-old's tricycle. Same fake code, same fake seal. I continued on, walking her through each case, my voice remaining the objective tone of someone presenting facts. The single mother, the retired couple, all members of protected classes, all systematically targeted with these fraudulent documents, designed to extort money from them in escalating fines. Patricia was silent for a long moment after I finished. She wasn't looking at the clock anymore. She was slowly paging through each tab in my file, her eyes scanning the documents with intense focus. Her initial wall of skepticism had crumbled. She looked up at me, and now, there was no weariness or dismissal in her eyes. There was a cold, controlled anger. "They got arrogant," she said, almost to herself. "Figured no one would check." She looked me straight in the eye. "Mr. Bailey, we have one chance to catch her flat-footed, and the element of surprise is critical." "I understand," I said. "What do you need from me?" "For now, nothing. Go about your life. Act like the concerned neighbor trying to work things out. Let her believe she's in control. I'll be in touch." She stood, extending her hand. This time, her handshake had a new weight to it. You did the right thing, sir. It takes a lot of courage to do this. I nodded, feeling a huge burden lift from my shoulders. I had passed the baton. I had found an ally. As I walked out of the county building and back into the sunlight, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a dangerous clarity. The fight had escalated to a new level. I was no longer just a participant. I was a confidential informant in an active criminal investigation. I had to go back to Maplewood Hills, into the heart of enemy territory, and act as if nothing had changed, all while knowing a storm was gathering just over the horizon. The following weeks were an exercise in restraint. Living in Maplewood Hills was like starring in a low-budget spy movie. I had to play the part of the increasingly desperate homeowner. I called Marcus and told him there was a permit delay with the move-in, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth, but a necessary one. Every time I went to get my mail, I could feel the eyes of Alicia's loyalists on me. They were watching, reporting back on whether I had complied. The second notice of violation sat on my desk like a ticking time bomb. I even attended an HOA meeting, sitting in the back row while Alicia, in her full glory, pontificated on the importance of standardized mulch colors. She looked directly at me when she spoke of the consequences for those who think they are above the community's rules. The whole room turned to look at me. I just sat there, my face a mask of neutrality, while inside, my patience was being ground down to a fine powder. I heard nothing from Patricia Williams, which was both unnerving and a good sign. It meant she was working, digging quietly. I could only imagine her process. I pictured her in her cluttered office late at night, surrounded by documents, following the money. In the war against corruption, the real guns aren't firearms, but subpoenas. And Patricia was firing them. She would have started with the HOA's bank accounts. On the surface, they probably looked normal. Dues coming in, payments for lawn care and pool maintenance going out, but Patricia would be looking for the anomalies. She would have seen the fines I documented being deposited, and then large, regular payments going out to a couple of companies with no clear explanation. One of them would stand out, a company called Prestige Demolition and Salvage. She would have dug deeper. A corporate records search would show Prestige Demolition was owned by a man named Frank Miller, someone with a minor criminal record for petty theft. Suspicious, but not a smoking gun. The real connection would come when she started investigating Alicia's past victims, the ones who had been forced out before I started my fight. She would spend hours poring over county property records, tracing the ownership of those foreclosed homes. And that's where the pattern would emerge. 3 of those properties, after being foreclosed on by the HOA, had been purchased for pennies on the dollar by a single LLC, Maplewood Redevelopment Group. And when Patricia subpoenaed the formation documents for that LLC, she would have found it. The link that connected everything. The sole signatory on the Maplewood Redevelopment Group's bank account was a man named Robert Thomas, Alicia's husband. And the owner of Prestige Demolition and Salvage, Frank Miller, Alicia's brother-in-law. The call came on a Tuesday. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. "I can't talk long." She looked me in the eyes, and I saw a new kind of exhaustion, but also a hard-edged determination. "It's worse than we thought, Austin. A lot worse." And then she laid it all out. The entire scheme, piece by piece, a story of such breathtaking greed and cruelty. The fines were never the point, she explained, her voice low but intense. They were just the weapon. Here's how it works. Step 1. Alicia targets a homeowner she thinks won't fight back. She buries them in fraudulent violations and fines that are impossible to pay. Step 2. She uses the unpaid fines to place a lien on the property and initiate foreclosure. She intimidates and pressures them until they give up and move out. I nodded, following along. But then she leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. But here's the evil genius part. Step 3. In the small window of time after the homeowner leaves and before the bank officially takes control, she sends in her brother-in-law's company, Prestige Demolition and Salvage. They go in on a phony HOA work order to remedy violations. But they don't fix anything. They strip the house. They tear open the walls to get the copper wiring. They rip up the hardwood floors. They take the kitchen appliances, the lighting fixtures, even the water heater. Everything of value is taken and sold for pure profit. I sat there, stunned. I remembered the demolition crew waiting in my yard. They weren't just there for the guest house. Then, Patricia continued, comes the final step. The house is now gutted, and its value has plummeted. So, Her husband's company, Maplewood Redevelopment, swoops in and buys the foreclosed property for a rock-bottom price. They do some cheap cosmetic repairs and flip the house for a massive profit. She leaned back, letting the horrific reality of it sink in. This wasn't an extortion scheme. It was a home theft ring, a family-run, organized criminal operation. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit profit. She took a sip of her cold coffee. This discovery changes everything. This is no longer just paper fraud at a county level. With the use of banks to move the money and the nature of the conspiracy, we're looking at interstate financial transactions and possible RICO violations. I knew what RICO meant. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was the law used to bring down mob bosses. So what's the next step? I asked. Patricia looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the hint of a smile. It wasn't a happy one. It was the smile of a hunter setting a trap. The next step is I make a call. This is too big for my office now. We need bigger guns. She stood up, throwing a few dollars on the table. Go home, Mr. Bailey. Be patient. And don't pay that fine. She paused at the door. I'm bringing in the FBI. The silence from the district attorney's office was heavy. With each passing day, the pressure from Alicia mounted. One morning, I found a document taped to my front door. It hadn't been mailed. It had been placed there to be seen, an act of dominance. It was a notice of intent to Leanne. The legal language was cold and ruthless. It stated that because I had failed to pay the fines, the HOA was beginning the process of placing a legal lien on my property. This was the first step toward forcing a sale of my home to collect the debt. The threat was no longer about the guest house. She was coming after my entire home now, the place I'd built my life after the core. She was trying to take everything. Any normal person would have panicked, which was exactly what she wanted. But as I held the paper in my hand, I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold rage. She had just walked herself deeper into a trap she had no idea existed. 2 days later, I got another call from a blocked number. This time, it wasn't Patricia. It was a man's voice, crisp and no nonsense. Mr. Bailey, this is Special Agent Miller, FBI. We need to see you. 1 hour. Federal Building downtown, room 402. Come in through the back entrance on Main Street. Someone will be waiting for you. The call ended. There was no room for questions. I drove downtown, a feeling of rapid acceleration settling over me. The Federal Building was the antithesis of the county courthouse. It was modern, glass and steel, and projected an aura of quiet, immense power. A man in a suit was waiting for me, as promised, and led me through a series of secure corridors to a windowless conference room. The room was sterile, containing only a long table, some chairs, and a large monitor on the wall. Patricia Williams was there, and seated with her were 2 men. The older one introduced himself as Agent Miller. He was probably in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that suggested he'd seen the worst of human nature and was no longer easily impressed. He radiated a calm, methodical authority. The other was Agent Chen, younger, sharper, with a wired energy that suggested he didn't miss a thing. Thank you for coming, Mr. Bailey, Miller began, his voice a low baritone. ADA Williams has brought us up to speed. We've conducted our own preliminary investigation, and I can confirm her suspicions. What you've uncovered is more than just fraud. It is an ongoing criminal enterprise. Agent Chen hit a button on a remote, and the screen on the wall came to life. A complex diagram appeared, with photos of Alicia. What we're looking at here, Miller continued, are potential violations of the RICO Act, specifically mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The Thomas family has been using the HOA as a weapon to defraud homeowners of their property. They've moved money through banks in multiple states and sold the salvage materials across state lines. That makes it our jurisdiction. He paused, looking directly at me. We have a very strong financial case against them. We could prosecute right now and probably win, but cases like this can get messy. Defense attorneys will argue it's a business dispute that got out of hand. They'll try to paint Alicia as an overzealous HOA president, not a criminal mastermind. Patricia spoke up. We want an ironclad case. We want to catch them in the act. We want to remove all reasonable doubt that they knew exactly what they were doing was illegal. That's when it clicked. My guest house, I said. It's the bait. Agent Miller nodded. Mrs. Thomas is fixated on it. The intent to Leanne notice shows she's getting impatient. She's about to make her move. We want to let her. The plan was simple and audacious. They needed me to surrender. We need you to officially capitulate, Agent Chen explained. We want you to write an email to Mrs. Thomas and the board. Tell them you can't continue the fight, that the fines and potential legal fees are too much. Tell them you will comply with the original demolition order. You have to make it believable, Miller added. Sound defeated, broken. The more you make her feel like she's won, the sloppier and faster she'll act. The goal was to trick Alicia into believing she had broken me, so she would quickly dispatch her brother-in-law's crew to begin phase 3 of their scheme, stripping the asset. The FBI would have surveillance teams in place, documenting everything. I sat there in silence for a moment, processing it. They were asking me to sacrifice the house I had poured my sweat and heart into, a sanctuary I had built for my friend. But then I thought of Mrs. Gable and her roses. I thought of Mrs. Miller, raising her kids alone while her husband was deployed. I thought of the other families they had ruined, and the ones they would ruin in the future if they weren't stopped. The choice was clear. I built it once, I said, looking Miller in the eye. I can build it again. Let's get them. A respectful nod from Miller. We'll make sure you're compensated for any damages, Mr. Bailey. You have our word. I'm not doing this for the money, I replied. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. I went home. Every sentence was a betrayal of my fighting instincts. Subject: property violation, 2412 Maple Drive. President Thomas and members of the board, I am writing to inform you that I can no longer continue to dispute the matter of the guest house on my property. After reviewing the notice of intent to lien and consulting with my family, the financial burden of the fines and potential litigation is simply too much for me to bear. As such, I will comply with the board's original order. Please consider this email my permission to proceed with the removal of the offending structure. I apologize for any inconvenience this has caused the community. Sincerely, Austin Bailey. I read it over, disgusted by my own subservient tone. It was perfect. With a deep breath, I moved the cursor over the send button. I clicked. The screen flashed a small confirmation. Your message has been sent. The bait was in the water. The trap was set. Now, all I could do was wait for the monster to leave its lair. Alicia's response came faster than I expected. Less than 20 minutes after I sent my surrender email, my phone pinged with a notification. Her email was short and utterly devoid of grace. It was a victor's final punch. Property violation, 2412 Maple Drive. Mr. Bailey, the board acknowledges your belated compliance. We regret that this matter had to escalate to this point, but we are pleased to see you have finally recognized your obligations to the community. Our contractor, Prestige Demolition and Salvage, has been notified and will be on your property within 48 hours to remedy the violation. Once the demolition is complete and the area cleared to the board's satisfaction, we may consider a partial reduction of the outstanding fines. Thank you for your cooperation. Sincerely, Alicia Thomas, President, Maplewood Hills HOA. It was perfect. The condescension, the vague promise of leniency, it was everything the FBI needed. I immediately forwarded the email to Special Agent Miller with a single line. She took the bait. Hours later, as dusk fell, an unmarked cable service van parked at the end of the street. The next day, I saw men in utility company uniforms working on a nearby telephone pole. The operation was on. The night before the demolition, Agent Chen and a young technician arrived at my back door. They carried hard-sided cases full of equipment. We're here to install a few eyes and ears, Chen said quietly. I smiled and gestured them inside. About that, I said, we may have already beaten you to it. I led him to my study, where Marcus was waiting, seated in his wheelchair before a bank of monitors. He'd been staying in my guest room for a few days, under the cover of helping me pack. This was Twist Hash 3, our ace in the hole. Agent Chen, I said, this is my friend Marcus. He used to be a technical surveillance countermeasures specialist for Force Recon. Marcus gave Chen a nod. Welcome to my command post. He typed a few keys, and one of the screens lit up with a series of high-definition camera feeds. One from the corner of the guest house roof, looking out over the yard. Another hidden in a tree, looking squarely at the front porch. One integrated into my doorbell. And the best part, Marcus said with a grin, is the audio. He flipped a switch. I have parabolic mics embedded in the roof vents. I can hear a squirrel sneeze from 50 yards. This whole place is pre-wired. Agent Chen stared at the feeds, then at Marcus, then back at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well, Mr. Bailey," he said, "you are full of surprises." They quickly integrated Marcus's system into the FBI's network, giving them a perfect, high-fidelity view of the coming battlefield. The next morning, the air was thick with tension. It played out just as it had in my memory of that day, but now, every detail had a new meaning. The prestige demolition and salvage truck arrived first, Alicia's brother-in-law, Frank, getting out, a smug look on his face, then the excavator, rumbling down the street. Finally, Alicia's pristine black SUV glided to a stop. She emerged, dressed in her cream power blazer, ready to witness her coronation. The two local police officers arrived soon after, looking bored and annoyed. They were completely unaware that they were merely supporting actors in a much larger production. I stood on my back porch, playing the part of the defeated man, while in my ear, a tiny receiver fed me the calm voice of Agent Miller from a van a block away. "All teams are in position. Await my signal." The confrontation played out almost exactly as I'd envisioned. Alicia approached, her face a mask of false pity. "Austin, I'm so glad you decided to do the right thing," she said, loud enough for the officers to hear. And then, believing she was out of earshot of anyone else, she leaned toward Frank. "Start with the bathroom," she whispered, not knowing Marcus's microphones were capturing every word. "Get the copper pipes out first, and be careful with the windows. They're custom Andersons, worth $1,000 apiece." Frank nodded. "Got it, boss." That was it. The confession. The irrefutable. In the act proof of the asset-stripping conspiracy. In my ear, I heard Miller's voice. "We've got her. Signal is on contact with the structure." Alicia turned back to me, her smile now cruel. "You might want to step back, Austin. This could get a little loud." She gave the signal to the excavator operator. The engine roared. The massive steel bucket rose into the air, eclipsing the sun for a moment. It lowered slowly, taking aim at the corner of the guest house. I held my breath. The bucket touched the wall with a sickening crack of splintering wood. Instantly, the world exploded in organized chaos. "FBI, hands in the air! Do not move!" The shout came from all directions. The doors of the cable and utility vans flew open. A dozen agents in black tactical vests swarmed out, rifles at the ready. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Alicia, Frank, and the terrified excavator operator. The two local cops stood frozen, their hands instinctively going to their holsters in sheer confusion. Agent Miller stepped out from the swarm, impossibly calm in the storm. He approached the officers, discreetly flipping open his credentials. "This is a federal crime scene, officers. Thank you for your support. We'll take it from here." Alicia's face was a portrait of total collapse. Her smug confidence melted into disbelief, then into raw panic as she realized the scale of the trap she'd walked into. What is this? I'm the HOA president," she sputtered, waving her worthless demolition order. "You have no authority here." Agent Miller approached her, his voice devoid of emotion. "You have no authority, Mrs. Thomas." He gave a signal, and Agent Chen moved in, handcuffing a stunned Frank. Miller looked Alicia squarely in the eye. "Alicia Thomas, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering." As Agent Miller began reading her the Miranda rights, the entire neighborhood seemed to be watching. Doors were open, neighbors stood on their lawns, phones held high, recording the Queen's downfall. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch, a small, resolute smile on her face. Mrs. Miller was holding her children, her face streaked with tears of relief. As they led Alicia away, her cream power suit looking absurd and out of place, I caught her eye. For a moment, I didn't see a mastermind or a tyrant. I just saw a pathetic, small-time bully who had finally picked the wrong fight and been exposed for all the world to see. Alicia's response came faster than I expected. Less than 20 minutes after I sent my surrender email, my phone pinged with a notification. Her email was short and utterly devoid of grace. It was a victor's final punch. Property violation, 2412 Maple Drive. Mr. Bailey, the board acknowledges your belated compliance. We regret that this matter had to escalate to this point, but we are pleased to see you have finally recognized your obligations to the community. Once the demolition is complete and the area cleared to the board's satisfaction, we may consider a partial reduction of the outstanding fines. Thank you for your cooperation. Sincerely, Alicia Thomas, President, Maplewood Hills awe. It was perfect. The condescension, the vague promise of leniency, it was everything the FBI needed. I immediately forwarded the email to Special Agent Miller with a single line. She took the bait. Hours later, as dusk fell, an unmarked cable service van parked at the end of the street. The next day, I saw men in utility company uniforms working on a nearby telephone pole. The operation was on. The night before the demolition, Agent Chen and a young technician arrived at my back door. They carried hard-sided cases full of equipment. "We're here to install a few eyes and ears," Chen said quietly. I smiled and gestured them inside. "About that," I said, "we may have already beaten you to it." I led him to my study, where Marcus was waiting, seated in his wheelchair before a bank of monitors. He'd been staying in my guest room for a few days, under the cover of helping me pack. "This was Twist #3, our ace in the hole. Agent Chen," I said. "This is my friend Marcus. He used to be a technical surveillance countermeasures specialist for Force Recon." Marcus gave Chen a nod. "Welcome to my command post." He typed a few keys, and one of the screens lit up with a series of high-definition camera feeds. One from the corner of the guest house roof, looking out over the yard. Another hidden in a tree, looking squarely at the front porch. One integrated into my doorbell. "And the best part," Marcus said with a grin, "is the audio." He flipped a switch. "I have parabolic mics embedded in the roof vents. I can hear a squirrel sneeze from 50 yards. This whole place is pre-wired." Agent Chen stared at the feeds, then at Marcus, then back at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well, Mr. Bailey," he said, "you are full of surprises." They quickly integrated Marcus's system into the FBI's network, giving them a perfect, high-fidelity view of the coming battlefield. The next morning, the air was thick with tension. It played out just as it had in my memory of that day. But now, every detail had a new meaning. The prestige demolition and salvage truck arrived first. Alicia's brother-in-law, Frank, getting out, a smug look on his face. Then the excavator, rumbling down the street. Finally, Alicia's pristine black SUV glided to a stop. She emerged, dressed in her cream power blazer, ready to witness her coronation. The two local police officers arrived soon after, looking bored and annoyed. They were completely unaware that they were merely supporting actors in a much larger production. I stood on my back porch, playing the part of the defeated man, while in my ear, a tiny receiver fed me the calm voice of Agent Miller from a van a block away. "All teams are in position. Await my signal." The confrontation played out almost exactly as I'd envisioned. Alicia approached, her face a mask of false pity. "Austin, I'm so glad you decided to do the right thing," she said, loud enough for the officers to hear. And then, believing she was out of earshot of anyone else, she leaned toward Frank. "Start with the bathroom," she whispered, not knowing Marcus's microphones were capturing every word. "Get the copper pipes out first. And be careful with the windows. They're custom Andersons, worth $1,000 apiece." Frank nodded. "Got it, boss." That was it. The confession. The irrefutable, in the act proof of the asset-stripping conspiracy. In my ear, I heard Miller's voice. "We've got her. Signal is on contact with the structure." Alicia turned back to me, her smile now cruel. "You might want to step back, Austin. This could get a little loud." She gave the signal to the excavator operator. The engine roared. The massive steel bucket rose into the air, eclipsing the sun for a moment. It lowered slowly, taking aim at the corner of the guest house. I held my breath. The bucket touched the wall with a sickening crack of splintering wood. Instantly, the world exploded in organized chaos. "FBI, hands in the air, do not move!" The shout came from all directions. The doors of the cable and utility vans flew open. A dozen agents in black tactical vests swarmed out, rifles at the ready. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Alicia, Frank, and the terrified excavator operator. The two local cops stood frozen, their hands instinctively going to their holsters in sheer confusion. Agent Miller stepped out from the swarm, impossibly calm in the storm. He approached the officers, discreetly flipping open his credentials. "This is a federal crime scene, officers. Thank you for your support. We'll take it from here." Alicia's face was a portrait of total collapse. Her smug confidence melted into disbelief, then into raw panic as she realized the scale of the trap she'd walked into. "What? What is this? I'm the HOA president." She sputtered, waving her worthless demolition order. "You have no authority here." Agent Miller approached her, his voice devoid of emotion. "You have no authority, Mrs. Thomas." He gave a signal, and Agent Chen moved in, handcuffing a stunned Frank. Miller looked Alicia squarely in the eye. "Alicia Thomas, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering." As Agent Miller began reading her the Miranda rights, the entire neighborhood seemed to be watching. Doors were open, neighbors stood on their lawns, phones held high, recording the Queen's downfall. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch, a small, resolute smile on her face. Mrs. Miller was holding her children, her face streaked with tears of relief. As they led Alicia away, her cream power suit looking absurd and out of place, I caught her eye. For a moment, I didn't see a mastermind or a tyrant. I just saw a pathetic, small-time bully who had finally picked the wrong fight and been exposed for all the world to see.